It's good to be with you this evening, and it's almost evening. And I know you've had a lot of speeches you've heard from today, and so what I'm going to do is actually, since I'm in Iowa, we might as well let's do a little town hall meeting. This way, I want to keep you all awake after a long day. So I'm really open to just thinking about what you want to talk about, answer questions that you might have concerns about. I just want to say one thing, and that is. Trust yourselves. One of the things I said 4 years ago when I was campaigning around Iowa and I was sitting at 1 or 2% in the national polls is don't look at the national polls. Trust your own eyes, trust your own ears, trust your own judgment. And if you do that, then things are going to work out just fine, because I really have a lot of faith in you, and you should too. People say, well, you know, New Hampshire is the one that's picked the last two presidential nominees. Yeah, and they both lost. The candidate you selected actually could have won, I believe, in 2008 and in 2012. And so I would strongly encourage you to do your job, which is to look at this field and find the person who has the best chance of bringing this country back to the values and principles that made this country a great country, and has the best chance to win the election, and has the best chance to get something done in Washington, D.C. All of those are important. You have to win in order to govern, and you have to have ideas in order to win, and then you have to have the experience and ability to actually get things done in order to accomplish what your ultimate goal is, which is to move this country in the direction that made it the greatest country in the history of the world. So with that, I'll be happy to stop and take whatever questions are on your mind. Oh. And if there isn't, I'll give a 30-minute speech. How's that? So I'm laying the gauntlet down.
Wish I had a couple more microphones and a couple more people running around here.
The legal limit, I'm told, is 3, so the answer is 3. I'm happy to have private conversations about what really happened.
In the debate the other night, the topic come up about the gold standard. How could you take that? In what direction would you take it, or what would you add to that comment in regards to monetary policy?
Well, I mean, I would say this, that we have a Federal Reserve that is acting far beyond and doing things that no Federal Reserve or no regulator of monetary policy has ever done. And the impact of that has been profound. It's been profound on savers, people who have responsibly saved their money, have seen no return on their investment. People who have speculated with their money have done very, very well. And whether it's in the real estate market and the stock market, core inflation, which again should be the only focus, in my opinion, of the Federal Reserve, is something that has been much higher than it needs to be. And of course, if you look at the impact on those savers, those who acted responsibly with their money, they're the ones who are most affected by it. Third, we have the Federal Reserve now involved in things that they have no business being involved with, which is overseeing the banking system in this country, giving them incredible power. I think we need to look at the chart of the Federal Reserve. Number one, we need to repeal Dodd-Frank, which is the one that gave them all that power. Repeal Dodd-Frank. Second, we need to reform the chart of the Federal Reserve to bring it back to its single focus, which should be on sound money, not on unemployment, not on labor markets. And the reason it should be is because what's happened, the Federal Reserve has been used by certainly this administration, and to some degree even the last administration, to prop up the economy that is being overburdened by regulation and taxation, and use the money supply in order to allow the economy to limp along at very low levels of growth, but not collapse from the weight of the fiscal fiscal policy of the federal government. So the answer is, in combination with the reforms that I've laid out in my campaign, talking about, I use the term explode the code. We're going to explode the federal tax code. I'm happy to sit here and talk about what we're going to do on taxes, but we're the only person that has a true flat tax. We have a flat tax on income. Now some others have a flat tax on income, but they don't have a flat tax when it comes to corporate taxes. You have two candidates who have value-added taxes, which is a brand new thing in America. But we have two candidates for president who are running and who are proposing a value-added tax. And we have one who wants to propose a national sales tax. All of which are great. The problem is you're going to have now a sales tax and an income tax. I think that's a very bad idea. I think we don't need to give the federal government more ways to get in your pocket. And a value-added tax or a national sales tax in conjunction with an income tax, and you say, well, in one case, two of the candidates actually propose both an income tax and a value-added tax. The other candidate proposes just simply a straight national sales tax without getting rid of the income tax. The problem is with the ability to tax in the 16th Amendment. So it's a very important thing to understand these tax proposals and how they affect fiscal policy in America. And that's important that we have stable, solid policies. We raise a sufficient amount of money for the federal government to operate, and then have ideas to do something that's very important, which is to control the growth of spending. And you have candidates in this race who have said that they don't want to do anything with entitlements, that they want to leave Medicare and Social Security and all these programs alone. It's 71% of the budget. Try to balance a budget that's running a structural deficit and not touch 71% of the budget that is scheduled to grow to 80% of the budget in the next 20 years. You can't do it. But again, you want to look at candidates that have sound monetary policy and sound fiscal policy, and I think we're the candidate in this race that has both. Yes, ma'am.
In our nation right now, we're seeing a lot of threats to our national security, not only with our porous borders, but also with ISIS and Russia, China. I would just like to hear your perspective on what we need to do in terms of national defense.
Yeah, I would say this, that one of my standard lines in this campaign is Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position. And if you look at all of the candidates in this race, with the exception of Lindsey Graham, put Lindsey over there, with the exception of Lindsey Graham, there isn't a whole lot of current national security experience. We have some candidates that have spent a year or two on a committee, but the bottom line is there's only one candidate in this race that has extensive, long-standing national security about the most important threat that faces this country, and that is the threat of radical Islam. And I served 8 years on the Armed Services Committee, but after the events of 9/11, while I was on that committee, I took very serious to understand my failings, because America was attacked while I was in the United States Senate. And I thought, okay, I had done with Joe Lieberman, as a matter of fact, a bunch of hearings on something called asymmetric threats, which we now call terrorism. And so I was doing stuff on that, and we were trying to learn how to adjust our force to deal with this from a military perspective, but then we were hit at home. And so I thought, okay, what can we do from a military perspective, and first to address this issue? But first I want to understand who they were. And what I learned after a little time spent on this is that the president, while he's a good man, but he didn't necessarily lay out the entire truth about the nature of the enemy. The enemy is, to call the enemy terrorists is like calling the Nazis blitzkriegers. Blitzkrieg is a tactic of war. It's not the ideology behind the war. The ideology behind this war is a holy war that elements of Islam are waging against the West. That's this war. And we have to have the courage to understand the external threat of that and the internal threat of that. And they're both real. And we have to be honest about them, and we're not being. And I know you'll see a lot of presidential candidates get up here and say, well, we have to define the enemy and all that stuff. I gave that speech 10 years ago. 10 years ago. Go look it up at the National Press Club. And I took that speech and I brought it to the White House and I put it in front of President Bush. And I said, Mr. President, we are losing this war not because we don't have the superior forces in Iraq. It's because we have not given the American public an understanding of the enemy we're fighting. We're not fighting Saddam Hussein anymore. We're fighting a brand new enemy, but we haven't done a very good job explaining that in Iraq anymore. And more so, we have an even more serious threat, and that is Iran. And that's why I authored the Iran Freedom Support Act, which Shane talked about. What that was the bill that put nuclear sanctions on Iran. The sanctions that brought Iran to the table under Barack Obama are sanctions I introduced when I was in the Congress. And I had opposition from Democrats like Biden, Kerry, Obama, and Clinton. And unfortunately, Bush. They opposed me. And even with that opposition, I brought a floor vote to try to get this bill passed, lost by 4. And those 4 Democrats were the 4 that I lost it by. But 5 months later, after it was clear that Iran was in fact developing a nuclear weapon, we passed that bill, a little watered-down version. I had to, I know this is a dirty word, compromise in order to get it done, but we put sanctions in place. Not as tough as I wanted, but still very tough sanctions. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been studying this issue, working on this issue, and passing and succeeding in doing things on this issue. I've lectured all over the country and even around the world on the threat of radical Islam. In April of this year, ISIS published a magazine. They published an online magazine on a pretty regular basis. And in their magazine, under the heading, "In the Words of Our Enemy," was a picture of me and my description of ISIS. Now, I am the only person in this race who has been in ISIS magazine. When I criticized President Obama in an op-ed with my friend Joel Rosenberg, some of you may know Joel, when I wrote a joint op-ed with him criticizing the president for engaging in negotiations with the Iranian ambassador responded to me. They know who I am, and I know who they are. If you want someone who's going to lead this country, a lot of good people are running for president. A lot of good people are running for, friends of mine running for president. They're not prepared to be commander-in-chief. If I had an opportunity this weekend to be at the Kansas City Chiefs Pittsburgh Steelers game, and I met Ned Yost, the manager of the Kansas City Royals. Now, if I called Ned Yost tonight and said, "Hey, Ned, I want a pinch hit tonight. I want you to put me in against the New York closer and see if I can hit that 90-mile-an-hour fastball when the game's on the line." Now, you may say, well, you know, Santorum's a very accomplished guy. I mean, he has a lot of, he's a great resume. He's a wonderful this, a wonderful that. But commander-in-chief is not an entry-level position. If you don't have experience in this area, you just don't walk in and say, "Oh, well, I get this." And people say, well, Reagan was a governor. Reagan spent 25 years of his life lecturing around the country on the evils of communism. Reagan understood it because Reagan invested his career in understanding the threat of the Soviet Union. None of these other candidates have. Let's just be honest, they haven't. No one has experience in this race. Are you willing again as a country to put someone in the position at a time, as my good friend who's a senior advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu told me, at a time when he believes, and the Israelis believe, that the world will be at war or on the brink of it, or you really want someone who has no experience, or worse, or maybe even worse yet, do you want someone in this race against a former Secretary of State who knows these issues cold at a time when the world is going to be roiling and Americans are going to say, who can we trust who has the knowledge and ability to be able to do this job? This is a serious issue, folks. It is not one, I understand, good people in this race. There's a time for the right person at the right time. A lot of these folks have great careers ahead of them. But the moment for someone who's a leader, who understands the national security implications that we're dealing with, is now. Yes, ma'am.
Senator Santorum, thank you for being here with us today. And piggybacking off of the national security question that I thought was very good, I'd like to ask you about your position on the cultural jihad that's being waged against Christians in this country. I don't know if you're aware that there are 2 schools in the area that are allowing Muslims to go in and teach about Muhammad and the Quran. There's also a madrasa in West Des Moines that's teaching Surah 9:5, the verse of the sword, that Christians deserve to have their heads cut off. how are they allowed to have a forum like that, where as if my father and his organization, the Gideons, should go onto school grounds to give a New Testament away, they would be breaking the law. So why do the Muslims get to promote their treason against our country where Christians cannot tell the truth?
Okay. I'm going to give you the hard answer to this. One of my favorite stories is a story about a guy named G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton was a great writer and social critic of the last century, early last century, in London. And he was asked by a London tabloid, a very liberal publication, to write an article. And the article was, he was to write about this article entitled, "What's Wrong with the World?" They thought they would make fun of him because he would then write all of these things blasting the new age that was upon us. And Chesterton said, okay, I'll do it. And so he took the assignment. The next day he submitted this paper, and here's what it said. "What's wrong with the world? I am. Respectfully submitted, G.K. Chesterton." Ladies and gentlemen, why are they able to do that in the schools here? Because you let them. Because you let them. How did they take the Bibles out of the school? Because you let them. How is it that they can do all the things that you object to? Because you let them. You see, when the left loses, they don't stop fighting. Do you realize that 10 of the 14 candidates for president on the Republican side have said the following with respect to same-sex marriage and the marriage decision? It is the law of the land, it's time to move on. It's the law of the land, it's time to move on. We lose because we don't fight. And when we lose, we wonder, how did we lose? Because the other side doesn't give up. They lose, and the next day they come back and they file another lawsuit and they fight again. They pound away. They keep at it. And we're nice people, and America's still a pretty great country, and I still can do pretty much what I want to do, and so we just move on. Because it really, how does it affect? Okay, so a few Muslim people are praying. I mean, really, how does it affect me? So we just move on. And we're like that frog in the pot. And that heat keeps getting turned up. And our leaders of our party, and our leaders of our conservative movement even, just say, well, it's time to, we can't focus, it's unpopular. Do you realize that with that decision of the Supreme Court acted unconstitutionally? According to even the minority opinions, they acted unconstitutionally. There was no constitutional basis for them to create the right of same-sex marriage. They acted in a way that violates your First Amendment, freedom of religion. They left wide open, as we saw in Kentucky, the ability for the state to persecute and prosecute people who oppose them, thereby limiting their ability to live their faith publicly. And then third, the Supreme Court of the United States said that marriage has nothing to do with children. The Supreme Court said that marriage is simply about adults, and children have nothing to do with marriage. The foundational institution of every healthy society are strong marriage bonds of which men and women come together to have and create a stable home for the raising of children. And now the Supreme Court has said, well, marriage has nothing to do with that. And 10 of the 14 Republican candidates for president, 3 of the 4 who are leading in the polls right now have said it's all over and we're going to move on. And Iowa, a majority of Iowans support them. And then you say, well, why are we losing? Why are you asking me? Really, why are you asking me? If you want to win, then you got to fight. And if you want to fight, you better find a leader who's willing to fight. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've known anything about my political career, I'm willing to fight. I stand up on all issues, not just national security, not just economic, but on the tough ones. I stand up for all of them. And I'm willing to fight. And here's the little kicker. I win a lot. I know we have a lot of candidates out there who say, oh, I'll fight. I'll stand for, and you know what? They haven't won a thing. They haven't won a thing. Haven't done anything to move the ball. You want someone who can fight and who's smart and who doesn't care about personal aggrandizement, but cares more about the cause of leaving this country in better shape for the next generation instead of their own poll numbers. That's leadership. That's conservative leadership. It's not standing up and saying, I will fight and give me money because I'm fighting. No. It's saying, trust me to lead, and I will put together the team to make sure that we get things done that get this country back on the right track. Yes.
Thanks, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Now, just to kind of clarify where I'm coming from, okay, I am bilingual and do a lot of interpreting for immigrant families. Also, I teach citizenship class for people who are seeking to become U.S. citizens.
It's great.
Okay, the other issue is you touched on the next generation. Now, I'm living in a fishbowl, okay, because I'm only acquainted with Des Moines, okay? So 40% almost of our school population are people who are not traditional Americans, if you know where I'm coming from with that. I mean, nothing negative about that. But there are 40% of those people are not traditional Americans. In the next 10 or 15 years, they're going to be voters. What's the plan of the Republican Party to draw these people who are coming from war-torn countries, who have seen things that we watch on the news? What's the Republican Party's plan for this 40% that could be a potential 40%?
I assume that most of them came here because they want the American dream. And that means the ability to pursue their earned success, to earn the success that they have, to worship the God that they want or not, to raise a family and relative safety and security, and to make sure that their children have an opportunity to do better than they do. My father was an immigrant to this country, and that's exactly what he wanted. And I don't think the vast majority of immigrants want anything differently. I think we do them a disservice when we follow the Democratic line of treating everybody by class or ethnic group and dividing America up, because that's what they do. They divide and conquer. That's Barack Obama in a nutshell. It's Hillary Clinton in a nutshell. Divide and conquer. When I go out and I talk about wage earners and workers, not black and white, not immigrant and Native American or native-born American. I talk about people based upon the condition that they are in, not who they are. Because the condition is just a temporary thing that can change if the policies are right and the initiatives in place. And I talk about how we have to have as a society, not a society, as a movement, conservative movement, a vision for how we're going to chart a path for the folks who are struggling in America today to succeed and live that American dream. And I think that's been missing, really missing from the lexicon of the Republican Party and the conservative movement. We have been stuck. We've been stuck in a world talking about pie charts and line graphs and growth tables and, tax policy. I have a dynamic tax policy, but I don't talk about it in terms of, well, we're going to increase GDP and we're going to, increase, capital formation. And I mean, what's that mean? We're My tax policy, you know how I talk about my tax policy? Other than the fact that we're going to explode the code and get rid of the IRS, you know what I talk about? I talk about we're going to create a plan in America that's going to make America the #1 manufacturer in the world, and that we're going to create good-paying jobs for the 74% of Americans who don't have a college degree. We're going to create opportunities for technical and other types of training to put people in jobs so they can work with their hands and their heads and they can provide for their families. And we're going to create a growing environment. We're going to create educational opportunities, and we're going to stop a flood of immigration of lower skilled workers who compete against previous immigrants as well as other lower skilled workers who are native born to hold down wages. We have seen in the last 20 years 35 million people come into this country, more than any time in the history of this country. And let me just say one thing. No one in this race but me wants to reduce the number of legal immigrants. No one. Most of the people in this race, including some, quote, conservatives, want to double or more increase the number of legal immigrants in this race, the number of legal immigrants coming into this country. Let me repeat that. Almost everybody wants to increase, some by more than double. Some, one program in particular, the H-1B program, which some of you may be aware of, which is the highly skilled worker visa that we hear, so, oh, we need all these highly skilled workers coming in. Well, the H-1B program brings in 65,000 people a year. 80% of them are at the lowest wage category of H-1B workers. They're basically computer programmers. And we've now seen a series of abuses that have now been made public, including Disney recently, that brought over 700 workers in this low-wage category of highly skilled workers, but low wage, came over, and 2 Disney employees just went public this week with what happened to them. They had to train these people. The people at Disney were making $101,000 a year, 700 of them. They trained a group of Indians to come over here. They were all fired. The Indians replaced them and made $62,000 a year. There's one candidate in this race that wants to take that program and increase it by 500% to $335,000, and he claims he's a conservative. And I think you know who I mean. If you don't, I'll be happy to tell you. He claims he's the most conservative standard bearer. He wants to double the number of legal and 5 times the number of H-1Bs. And every single candidate in this race, everyone, wants to allow anybody that's here in this country illegally to stay. Now, some will say they stay through citizenship. Others will say they stay by having a permanent worker visa. But in either case, everybody on the stage tonight, everybody in this race has said they can stay. They're not going to send them home, except me. That's why I am the only person in this race that gets an A from Numbers USA and the other immigration groups who want to protect American workers. And American workers, by the way, include the 35 million, or actually, to make it 23 million, legal immigrants that have come into this country who are legitimately here and, by the way, are having a hard time finding work that sustains families too. So if you want someone who's going to go out and talk to workers in America who are here legally, who were born here, and say, we're going to provide an opportunity to create jobs and educational opportunities, we're going to stop the competition where we've had now, over this 20-year period, the lowest wage growth in the history of our country. Let me repeat that. Lowest wage growth in the history of our country. You want someone who's going to go out and deliver that message in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Indiana? We're going to bring back manufacturing. We're going to provide training and skills training. And we're going to stop unfair competition from labor coming in to lower your wages and take your jobs. You know what? We can change the map. And we can get this country back on the right track. And there's only one candidate that's delivering this message, ladies and gentlemen. One. And you and I would need to know that. Yes. Mona.
Yes. Two quick questions. One is this 2-tier debate. I think there's some really smart people missing from the main debate. So first question is, are you going to be at the meeting in D.C. with all of the candidates tomorrow? Is that all the candidates?
I will not personally be at the meeting, but our campaign will be represented.
Okay, so you are represented. And then the second one, what are your...
I'll be in Iowa.
Wow, good for you. The other question is this debt vista that was passed by Congress and by our, the Republican leadership this week. Tell me what you think about that.
Was it a good deal? No, it was a terrible deal. Was it a deal that we could have gotten a lot better? Yes. Why do we get in this deal? We got in this deal because of something called the sequester. And the sequester was supposed to be this worst case scenario that no one would ever go with, and because it had draconian cuts on defense, less draconian, but still cuts. And the reason I say draconian cuts on defense and less draconian on rest of spending is because the rest of spending was dramatically increased under Obama. Defense wasn't. So defense was already at a low level and was cut further. Domestic spending was at a high level and cut. So they were both draconian cuts, but one from a very high baseline, the other one from a low baseline. And so Obama put this forward, and the Republicans agreed to it, thinking, okay, this would force us. And of course, it didn't force us, and now we've been stuck with this thing for 4 years. We haven't had a defense bill in 7 years. Now, people don't understand what that means. But that means that the Defense Department is operating on contracts that are 7 years old. They can't issue new contracts. They can't get two contract numbers because we haven't passed a bill. And we have not, so you already have this encumbrance of working through old contract numbers. And so if you, Dave, if you wanted to come and offer a product to the Defense Department, they'd say, okay, we love your product. Now you got to go find someone that you can, convince to sell your product through them, because you can't do it directly with us, because we don't have the authority to contract with you. It's a disaster. And what happened was this pressure built up. Why? Because we couldn't find a compromise. Because we didn't have leaders who were willing to go in and figure out a way to make this work. I'm as tough as nails on all of this stuff, but I'm not willing to sacrifice the national security of my country. And that's what we've been doing. You throw on top of that the policies of this administration. So I have some sympathy for the folks who negotiated this deal. We needed to do something to raise the defense. We had to do something. We need a new defense bill. We can't keep operating now on an 8-year-old defense policy. And so something had to be done. And what Boehner did, unfortunately, was he had a short amount of time between the time that he was going to negotiate this deal and leave. And so he just said, I'll take whatever deal you got. Because he was on a tight timeline, and they knew it. And they knew that if it passed on to the next one, we'd be months and we probably wouldn't get a deal. So we got a bad deal. And I would just say we have a bad deal because we've had poor leadership. And let me just say something maybe you won't like. We've had poor leadership from Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and the leadership of the House. I think everybody agrees with that. We've also had poor conservative leadership. We've had poor conservative leadership who, in my opinion, are more interested in their own PR than they are trying to get a deal that's actually conservative. No one is going to get everything they want when you have a Democratic president. You're not. Which means you have to, horrible word, at least to some, compromise. I use the example of welfare reform. Welfare reform passed under a Republican Congress and a Democratic president. We eliminated a federal entitlement. We block granted it to the states. We froze the amount of, we cut it by 10%, froze it, and then block granted it to the state. We froze it for 10 years. Oh, amazing. I mean, can you imagine if we did that with every federal entitlement? It would be, conservatives would be out in the streets. And we put a work requirement and time limits. When I negotiated that bill as a first-year senator in a Republican Senate that just took control, as a first-year senator with a Democratic president. And I negotiated that bill. Bill Clinton vetoed it once, vetoed it twice. In an election year, a lot of folks said, give up, we'll use it as an election issue. I said, I am not interested in victories at elections and then putting off to the next time, oh, we'll get a better deal later. If you got a chance to get a deal like that, take it. And I'll negotiate other things, and I did. I put more money in for daycare. Am I for more money for daycare? No, I'm not. Am I for more money for transportation funds? No, I'm not. But I did. And when I did it, the conservative groups ripped me. Ripped me. Oh, he's giving away the store. He's a spendthrift. He's a big government conservative. He's spending all this money. We got the bill passed. The president signed it. Welfare rolls were cut by 50%. In the state of Wisconsin, 93%. The amount of money that states saved was enormous. It helped states' budget for years. And they gave them flexibility to deal with the poor. Poverty levels went to the lowest level ever 4 years later. So it's not just that we reduced the rolls, but it worked. Employment went up, particularly among single, never married mothers, the hardest folks to employ. And every single group that ripped me, every single conservative group that took me to task now cites on their website the greatest conservative victory in the last 30 years was welfare reform. We have had poor conservative leadership in Washington, D.C., as well as poor leadership within the Republican establishment. We need a conservative leader who can deliver, a conservative leader who knows how to get things done. And ladies and gentlemen, look at this field. A lot of very talented people. No one fits that bill but one. And that's why I ask for your support today.
Thank you so much. And we're going to take a break, 10, 15-ish minute break, and you can chat with Senator Santorum, and I'm going to close this up.